Let's look at Matthew 14, and what we're looking at is the storm when the disciples were in the boat, okay? And I was watching straight out 2/3 of the way across, there's a tiny dot. There is a fishing boat out there, and I want you just to think of being out in the middle of that lake in the dark, being a Jewish person that thought that the abyss, the bottom of the lake, was the abode of the demons. Right? They always thought of the abyss, the bottomless, they didn't have oceanography. They didn't know how deep this lake was. And their fearful minds at night, they're in a black, dark, watery storm. And they think all the monsters are down in the bottom, and they're in a low-keeled ship taking on water, and Jesus isn't with them. He didn't come with them. And that's what we're reading about. So I want to emphasize, you're going to be in a situation like that, either in a hospital or in a car accident or in a far-off land where you're off in an awful place and it seems so dark, and you're going to think, Jesus isn't with me. And he was trying to teach them a lesson, that he's always with them, even when they don't see him. See, that's what you'll learn up here if you just think about it long enough. He set them up. This whole thing you're reading, Jesus set them up for this. He knew the storm was coming. He sends them out alone. He comes up here to watch them, and to watch them struggle and get scared out of their minds. And then he comes to them right when they need him. What a wonderful sight.
Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves, because the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified.
"It's a ghost,"
they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them,
"Take courage! It is I! Don't be afraid!"
"Lord, if it's you,"
Peter replied,
"tell me to come to you on the water."
"Come,"
he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out,
"Lord, save me!"
Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him.
"You of little faith, why did you doubt?"
he said. And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying,
"Truly you are the Son of God."
Now in your minds, here's something to remember. 2/3 of all of Christ's recorded miracles, 66% of all of Christ's recorded miracles occur right here, in this little area that you're looking at, in this region of Galilee here. 2/3. This was really the center of everything. So they finished the feeding of the 5,000 right there at the corner. And Jesus says, get in the boat and go to the other side. Okay, next verse.
After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone.
Evening, 6 to 9 p.m. So he puts them on the boat sometime before 6 o'clock because they had these watches, and the first watch of the evening, watches were 3 hours long. There was the first watch, the second watch, the third watch, the final watch that went from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. This was the first watch of the evening. That helps you when you're hearing the third watch, the second watch, the whatever watch. 6 to 9 p.m. So do you see how beautiful the details are of this? Jesus had just done the biggest thing. The disciples were amazed out of their minds. 12 baskets of fragments left after 30,000 probably people ate from one kid's lunch. Remember the big deal? They had just seen the power of God to make them almost awestruck. And they're kind of just, it's like what always happens. You experience a big high spiritually, and you're kind of floating along, and Jesus says, get in the boat, and boy, they're so excited, and they're just thinking of what it means. They'll never have to work again. There's endless food with Jesus, you know? I mean, can you imagine the wheels were turning in their mind? I mean, maybe it would work with their wallets. You know what I mean? Every time you stuck your hand in, money would come out. I mean, I don't know what they were thinking, but they were thinking big stuff when they get on the boat right there, and all they're doing is just going to the other side. They didn't think they needed him. And so they get in the boat at 6 o'clock or before 6, and they start across.
But the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves, because the wind was against it.
Now they get out a considerable distance. Somehow they got out there in the middle of the lake, and it says that it was tossed by the waves. The Greek word is basanadzo, which means to be tormented. Maybe think of a hot tub with all the jets going, you know. All of a sudden, the whole lake out there became like a jacuzzi. The waters are tormented. Now, it appears that this was an attempt, because Satan several times tried to get the Lord. Maybe he was trying to sink the disciples. You know, he might have thought he can close this thing down in one. Can you imagine? You sink the boat, you got them all, it's over. But this was an unnatural. These guys were used to the lake, right? Think about it. They made their living out here. They were in a storm like they had never seen. It was tormented. See, Matthew wrote this. He's the tax collector. He's very precise. He says, basanadzo. The waters were tormented. So they were in a super storm, and they're out in the middle. Okay, verse 25.
During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake.
Okay, first watch was from 6 to what? Second watch. Third watch, 12 to 3. What's the fourth watch? 3 to 6. How long we've been out there? They've been out there 9 or 10 or 11 hours in a jacuzzi, thinking they're going to, you know what I mean? You have a little turbulence on the airplane, and we all put on our seatbelts. Can you imagine 11 hours of paddling your heart out and getting nowhere and bailing water out? Do you know what they were thinking? Why didn't he come with us? Why are we all alone? Why did he send us? I wish I hadn't even come. I'm so sick. They were out. They thought they were dying, and Jesus sent them. Okay, next verse.
When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified.
It's a ghost,
they said, and cried out in fear.
The word cried in Greek is the word for scream. So this isn't, oh my, who is that? They were already distraught by the storm, thinking they were dying, and here comes a ghost. You know what I mean? Kind of adding insult to injury. They scream, okay. In verse 27.
But Jesus immediately said to them,
Take courage! It is I! Don't be afraid!
And that don't be afraid is an imperative, literally, in the order of the Greek words. Stop fearing. What's the most repeated negative prohibition in the Bible? Fear not. What is the most normal human reaction to everything that happens in life? Yep, and fear, meditated on, leads to what we call anxiety. Anxiety is meditating on our fears. I'm not going to have enough money to retire. I will not have enough money for my medical payments. I am not going to have enough money for my education. I am not going to get a good job after I get my education. I will never find a husband or a wife. I mean, just think of all of your fears and meditate on them, and you become, what? Anxious. They were quite anxious out there. They had already gone through, we're going to sink and drown, and now they're thinking, the ghosts are coming after us. So Jesus says, stop fearing. And that's the most repeated negative commandment in the Bible. We are like sheep. We're fearful, troubled, anxious. Remember when sheep are afraid, they lose their fur. Yeah, it just comes out, you know, like when you have chemo, your hair comes out. when sheep are stressed, their wool just comes out in blotches. They just lose it. Jesus says, don't stop fearing. Okay, next verse.
Lord, if it's you,
Peter replied.
tell me to come to you on the water.
Isn't that a classic statement? Command me. Now, what it tells me is anything Jesus tells him to do, he's going to do. You know, Jesus said, stop fearing. He said, I really am not afraid. I'll walk on the water. I mean, isn't that, do you see why Peter was the prince of the apostles? I mean, what a man. He'd do anything. Okay, verse 29.
Come!
He said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus.
So Jesus says to follow me, and he did. Isn't that neat? And he walked on water. And boy, that must have been an experience. Okay, verse 30.
But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out,
Lord, save me!
I love this. When he saw the storm, he began to fear. So he starts meditating again on his fears. You know, now I'm going to drown again. See, he took his eyes, right, off what? Off Jesus and started looking at the problems. Right there is our whole life. We have a choice. Focus on Jesus, walk on water through the storm, look at the storm, and sink. And then when he's sinking, the next verse is the best, okay? He said, Lord, save me. Verse 31.
Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him.
You of little faith, why did you doubt?
Now, if Jesus stretched out his hand, how close did Jesus have to be to Peter? Jesus was close enough to rescue him. Now, I want you in your mind to think Jesus has orchestrated this whole thing. He knew when they were at their wits' end. He knew when Peter was, at his desperate moment. And right at that instant, it says, immediately, Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and saved him. Okay, next verse, verse 32.
And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down.
Now, isn't that interesting? When Jesus gets into your boat, the storm stops. See? Isn't that an interesting thought? Jesus came to them on the storm. Now think about that. Jesus, the avenue, the highway Jesus came to them was the highway of their problem. Their problem was they were in a storm and they were sinking. Jesus came on the highway of their storm to them, and when he got in the boat, which signaled that they were aware of his presence. See, do you catch that? They didn't know it was him in the distance, but when they knew it was him, Peter had this fearless ability to walk on water, and when he got in the boat, everything was great. And the last verse says, verse 33, here's the response the Lord wants from us.
Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying,
Truly you are the Son of God.
And that's the response he wants from us up here. Turn to the last 2-3 verses of Matthew's Gospel, Matthew 28, because this is the cement to this whole event. Matthew 28, Great Commission.
Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go.
The mountain. I wrote in my Bible, Arbel, because I'm a very concrete person. I have a mind that sees pictures, and I see pictures. I see Jesus standing here with as many as 200 fishing boats out there. There were harbors all the way around here, so that was just filled with boats. And Jesus said, I want to meet you on that mountain, okay? Verse 17.
When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted.
So nothing's changed. They're the same guys, ordinary people, worshiping and still doubting. Remember what we talked about yesterday about Elijah? He's the same way. He's a subject to like passions. The apostles, even at the Great Commission, were still struggling. They struggle after. They were still imperfect people working for a perfect boss. But they worshiped him, but they still doubted. Okay, verse 18.
Then Jesus came to them and said,
All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age.
What was the last phrase? Lo, I am what? Okay, here's the lesson. Jesus sent them from that city out in the middle of the lake. They got in the storm, and they paddled 11, 10, 9 hours, scared to death. Jesus was up here. It says, if you read all the gospel accounts, he was watching them. That's what Luke and John emphasize, that Jesus was watching them through their storm. In the dark, he was watching them. He knew. Remember it says, no temptation takes you but such as is common, but God is faithful. Jesus knew how far to go before they'd snap, before they'd give up, before it was too much. He was watching them, and when they got to their limit, he walks out to them, right out on the water. And they're scared to death until they know it's him. And as soon as they know it's him, all the problems cease. Now Jesus ends his earthly ministry in the gospel accounts right here. And he tells them, I want you to spend the rest of your life going for me. But as you go, I want you to never forget one thing. Wherever you go, whatever storm you face, whatever fears you start meditating on, they'll all be okay if you remember, lo, what? Yeah, I am with you always. The greatest promise we have. I mean, it's wonderful to know Bible verses. It's wonderful to know Bible doctrine. Do you know what the best thing of all is? The first thing a child learns, that Jesus comes to be with you. You know, we tell them to let Jesus in your what? Yeah, in your heart. We're not, there's not a little door, and, he gets to be with us. What's the promise of Christmas? His name should be called Emmanuel, which being interpreted is God. I mean, that's how he started this whole thing. He said, I want you to know that I am with you. And what's neat is the Holy Spirit, when the Holy Spirit came on the apostles, they became aware from that point on of the presence of the Lord. And the more we're aware of his presence, we're just like the apostles. We are fearless. We're bold. But when we look at the storms of life instead of at the one who's with us, we start sinking again. Okay? Let's take a moment, and I want you to cement this in your mind. And I want you to say, Lord, I know you're with me. And remember this spot. A lot of times what happens is we have all this and everybody jumps up and runs and starts getting rocks. You should get the diamond. There's a diamond sitting right next to you right now. And that is, Jesus said, I am with you in your storms. And just get that in your mind and maybe take a couple minutes to bow your head and pray and get this deep into your heart before we move on.
Live and pleads for me. My name is graven on his hands.
Probably Mount Arbel was one of our most important places, just from the fact of, from the New Testament, being able to see all the places where Jesus walked and where he taught.
To visit the Holy Land and to walk in the places where Jesus walked is an unforgettable, life-changing experience. Seeing places written about in the Bible changes the way that you read the Bible. The beautiful view from the top of Mount Arbel is breathtaking and provides a view of the entire Sea of Galilee, where much of Jesus' ministry took place. To be able to see all of the places at one time where 2/3 of Jesus' miracles took place is a special blessing. To picture Jesus watching his disciples in a boat out on the sea from this lofty point and knowing exactly where they were and the struggles they were facing helps me to trust Jesus, to know that he is watching and caring for me and that he will not let me be tempted beyond my limits.